The hearing room was packed, not just with lawmakers, but with press, aides, and silent cameras streaming to millions. It was supposed to be another day in Washington, another panel, another round of arguments about policy, power, and public trust. But from the start, something felt different. The energy was tense, like everyone was waiting for a fuse to spark. Whispers moved across rows. Phones were ready. The microphones were live. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. sat at the witness table, calm and still, his notes neatly stacked, his hands folded. Across from him, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez flipped through her documents with a focus that felt sharp, almost surgical. The usual greetings were skipped. This wasn't about civility. This was war under fluorescent lights. When it was her turn to speak, AOC didn't hesitate. Her voice was clear, every word steady, as she leaned forward into the mic and said, "Wit, all due respect, this isn't testimony. This is a joke. And you, sir, are its punchline." The air was sliced open, gasps, shifting chairs. A pause that seemed to freeze time. Some aides looked up in shock. Some scribbled faster. Journalists leaned in like they had just been handed gold. But Kennedy didn't move. He didn't blink. He just looked at her with the kind of stillness that comes from surviving storms that no soundbite can match. AOC continued, laying out a list of quotes he'd made in the past, some controversial, some offensive, some already walking headlines. She read them aloud with the tone of a lawyer making her closing argument. Her words were aimed not just at Kennedy, but at everyone watching, the public, the press, history. Still, Kennedy said nothing. Not yet. When she finished, the room seemed to breathe again. The chairman gave a tired nod and passed the floor back to Kennedy. He leaned into his microphone slowly. His voice didn't rise. He didn't match fire with fire. Simply said, "Congresswoman, I've been called worse by better." He paused, then added, "Me, a joke. I'd ask who's laughing now." That was it. No insult, no shouting. Just a line that landed like thunder. The silence afterward was louder than anything else in that room. AOC sat back, blinking, recalculating. Her words had been sharp, but his reply was like stone solid, unmoved. The rest of the room shifted in silence. Some tried to hide smiles. Others looked away. Outside, the internet exploded. The clip hit social media in minutes. Split-screen edits, remixes, headlines. Oh. One side praised AOC for her courage. The other hailed Kennedy's composure as legendary. Joke backfires. Hashtag Kennedy clapback. Hashtag stillness speaks. The hashtags trended within the hour. Conservative commentators played the video on a loop. Liberal analysts defended AOC, calling her remarks a necessary truth. But for the public, the moment wasn't about policy. Anymore, it was about power. Who held it, who showed it, and who refused to break under pressure. Talk shows replayed it again and again. On The View, Joy Behar called it the greatest non-shouting comeback in political history. Meanwhile, on conservative radio, hosts mocked AOC for underestimating an old-school politician with nothing left to prove. That evening, Kennedy released a short video from his office. He didn't address AOC directly. Instead, he looked into the camera and said, "Disagreement isn't disrespect. We can argue hard and still hold dignity." The line spread fast. Teachers quoted it in classrooms. Editors used it in headlines. Celebrities reposted it. AOC stayed quiet for 2 hours. Then a single tweet appeared on her feed. "I speak truth. If it stings, maybe listen harder." Some called it a second strike. Others saw it as strength. The divide deepened. But beneath all the noise, one truth had already taken root. This wasn't about what was said, it was about how it was said. Calm had won against confrontation, not by overpowering it, but by refusing to dance. And in a world built on sound, it was silence that suddenly held all the power. The next morning, the buzz hadn't faded. It had grown sharper. News anchors dissected every second of the moment between AOC and Kennedy like it was a military maneuver. Talk radio was electric with callers, half of them furious, the other half thrilled. The divide wasn't new, but the scale was. Something had shifted. What was meant to be a policy hearing had become a cultural fault line. In the back rooms of Capitol Hill, aides scrambled. Staffers from both camps were called into emergency briefings. Internal memos warned of escalations. One advisor close to Kennedy warned that if the situation wasn't handled carefully, it would define his legacy more than any speech he'd ever given. On AOC's side, a media consultant advised her to let the fire burn longer it was raising donations, driving engagement, building the narrative she had cultivated for years. Bold, direct, unafraid. But behind closed doors, even she looked uneasy. Did I go too far? She reportedly asked a trusted aide. The aide paused. You went hard, but you didn't lie. The internet had already declared sides. TikTok was filled with young activists mimicking AOC's joke line. Gen Z praised her boldness, her unwillingness to show deference to power, especially male, white, legacy power. But another wave had begun. Older voters, independents, and veterans sharing Kennedy's quote with quiet reverence. I've been called worse by better. It had history in it, pain, gravity. It wasn't just a comeback. It was a line drawn in years. That same day, a young investigative reporter named Layla Vargas, working for a new media platform focused on transparency and politics, received an anonymous file in her inbox. It contained internal documents from a media strategy firm called Narrate Strategies. The documents were labeled response templates, crisis moments, congressional edition. Layla read through them, heart-pounding. There, in black and white, were test phrases designed for viral moments, phrases almost identical to what both AOC and Kennedy had said. Me, a joke. Who's laughing now? Sometimes truth has to sting to wake people up. Double quote scripted. Or at least prepared. Layla's breath caught. If this was reland, she'd have to verify everything it meant the moment that had captured the nations. Attention wasn't spontaneous at all. It was wargamed, fed, managed. She dug deeper. The firm had ties to multiple lobbying groups, some aligned with healthcare giants, some with defense, some, strangely, with foreign policy consultants. That raised a red flag, because what hadn't been noticed in the viral fight was why the hearing had been held at all. Kennedy's testimony had included sharp criticism of pharmaceutical influence in foreign vaccine diplomacy. He had connected pharmaceutical interests to U.S. policy in Africa and South America. He claimed that aid was being used to force market control, not just humanitarian support. The hearing was supposed to be about, transparency in global health spending. But no one was talking about that now. Layla realized what had happened. Fight had sucked all the oxygen from the real issue. The actual content was lost. And that maybe had been the point. She made 3 calls. One to a cybersecurity analyst, one to a congressional source she had trusted before, and one to her editor. Then she began writing. Meanwhile, Kennedy held a private meeting with 3 Democratic lawmakers behind closed doors. It wasn't publicized, it wasn't recorded. But a source leaked that Kennedy expressed concern that the attention was being used to bury the substance of what he had testified. Across town, AOC met quietly with a group of younger legislators. According to one staffer, her tone was more reflective than defensive. I don't want to become just a moment, she said. They turn me into a meme, they kill the message. In the White House, an unnamed advisor told a reporter that the administration was staying clear of the chaos. It's nuclear right now, they said. No matter what we say, it'll backfire. On news channels, the argument had already evolved into something bigger. It wasn't AOC versus Kennedy. Anymore, it was a generational war. A fight over tone, truth, and what politics was supposed to look like that night. Kennedy released another short video, just 2 minutes long. He didn't mention AOC. He didn't quote himself. He just said this: "I testified about global programs because I care about American influence and the people we affect. I won't let noise replace truth. If anyone disagrees, let's debate the facts, not the sound bites." The video ended. No background music, no cuts, and it went viral all over again. Not because it was loud, but because it was real. Layla finished her article just after midnight. The headline read, "The script behind the shouting. Who benefits when politics becomes performance?" She hit publish, and waited for the storm. By morning, Layla's article had exploded across every major platform. The script behind the shouting became the top trending headline within hours. It wasn't just because of the names involved: AOC, Kennedy, Congress. It was the accusation. At the center of it all, that what the public believed was raw, emotional. Live confrontation had actually been rehearsed, polished, and packaged by media consultants. Layla had laid it all out. She included screenshots of leaked strategy documents. She quoted lines from training emails. She exposed how public hearings had quietly become theater where moments weren't just anticipated, they were manufactured. And the most damning part, both sides had participated. Within the Capitol, reactions were swift and cold. Offices issued statements denying involvement with narrate strategies. Others called the leak selective and misleading. But reporters weren't buying it anymore. Too many patterns matched. Too many recent viral moments in hearings now looked suspiciously orchestrated. AOC remained silent that morning. Kennedy, however, made an appearance live in front of the Capitol, flanked by 2 independent senators. "No one owns my voice," he said into a crowd of flashing cameras. "Not the left, not the right, not any media firm. And if anyone thinks I'm a puppet, they're welcome to read every word I've written, every vote I've taken." It was short, controlled, and it worked. Reporters began questioning. Had Kennedy known? Had he rehearsed? Or had he simply been prepared without knowing the full game? Meanwhile, the White House held an unscheduled press briefing. The press secretary, looking visibly rattled, admitted that media training firms do sometimes prepare elected officials for public communication, but denied any federal relationship with narrate strategies. The room erupted. A question from the back: "So are viral sound bites the new governance?" Another: "Has Congress become a subscription model for outrage?" Layla watched the broadcast in her tiny apartment, her inbox bursting with requests from the New York Times, The Guardian, and even 60 Minutes. But she ignored them. Her story wasn't done. She hadn't yet answered the question she kept circling back to: who was paying narrate strategies? She followed the digital trail. It took hours. Layers of shell companies, redirected domains, offshore accounts. But then she found it: an encrypted contract with a lobbying firm based in Brussels. One that represented international pharmaceutical conglomerates. Her heart dropped. Kennedy had claimed during his testimony that vaccine aid was being used as a tool for market expansion. And now she had found proof that one of the media firms involved in silencing his message had been directly funded by those same interests. This wasn't just political drama, it was global manipulation. She contacted 2 senators anonymously. She leaked enough to trigger a private inquiry. And by the end of the week, a classified Senate Ethics Committee session was underway. Across the country, town halls buzzed with tension. Ordinary citizens, once caught in daily headlines, were now asking real questions. Who decides what we see? What's true? What's staged? AOC finally broke her silence with a carefully worded video posted late Friday night. She sat in a quiet room. No makeup, no staff, just her and the lens. "I've always spoken with conviction," she said. But if that conviction was used by others to manipulate public focus, then I failed my duty to protect the truth. I won't defend performance. I'll defend policy. So let's get back to that. It was raw and effective, but reactions were mixed. Her supporters applauded her honesty. Critics accused her of backtracking only after exposure. Some media outlets claimed the whole scandal was overblown, insisting that all public figures use media coaching. But Layla's next report silenced that defense. She revealed that Narrate Strategies had received millions in indirect funding from a global pharmaceutical alliance, and not just during the hearing, but for over 5 years. Their clients included multiple think tanks, to government departments, and a popular streaming news channel that had aired dozens of opinion segments discrediting Kennedy's medical claims without citing sources. Congress went into damage control. AOC and Kennedy were both asked separately to testify at a newly formed special committee on media ethics and foreign influence. The public watched closely. It wasn't about whether these two figures hated each other anymore. It was about whether either of them could admit that someone else had used their voices for something far larger and far darker than personal politics. Outside the Capitol that day, protesters gathered. Some held signs of Kennedy's quote. Others lifted banners that said, "Truth has no script." Layla stood in the crowd, notebook in hand, watching history twist again. She didn't know how it would end, but she knew it had finally begun. The day of the town hall arrived like a national test. The venue in Philadelphia, historic old theater retrofitted for live broadcast, was packed with journalists, students, political strategists, and everyday citizens. It wasn't just an event. It was a reckoning branded across every news channel as the debate that could reset politics. The stage was minimalist. 2 chairs, 1 moderator. No banners, no slogans. Just the expectation of truth. When AOC walked out, the crowd cheered, but not like fans. Like people hoping she might say something real, something unscripted. She wore no earpiece. She had no notes. Kennedy followed moments later. The applause was quieter, but no less respectful. A man who had once been mocked now stood as a symbol of measured resilience. He looked to the crowd, then to AOC, and gave a small nod. She returned it. Then they sat. And the silence was thick. The moderator, a respected journalist known for cutting through noise, didn't waste time. You've both become symbols, not just of your parties, but of something bigger. Anger, hope, resistance. Let's start here. What do you regret most about that hearing? AOC didn't hesitate that I played a role in distracting the country, she said. I should have stayed on topic. I should have challenged policy, not person. What I said about Mr. Kennedy wasn't just sharp, it was strategic. I thought I was winning the narrative. I wasn't. I was being used. Kennedy folded his hands. I regret not calling it out sooner, he said. I knew something felt off. But I told myself it was politics, that everyone's coached. I underestimated the damage that does. The crowd sat silent, listening. Then came the moderator's next question. Were you coached to say those exact lines? Both paused. AOC glanced to Kennedy. He looked back. No, she said slowly, not directly. But I've been surrounded by people who know exactly what to say to go viral. And I listened to them more than I listened to myself. Kennedy nodded. Same. It wasn't a script. But it was a setup, and we both walked into it. The moderator shifted. Let's talk about the actual issue that got buried: foreign influence in vaccine diplomacy. Is the public even aware of what the original hearing was about anymore? That was the real wound. Kennedy leaned forward. Pharmaceutical firms are influencing how U.S. aid is distributed abroad. Not for health, for market control. I said that under oath. But nobody remembers. They only remember our quotes. AOC jumped in, and those firms, those interests were tied to the very media firms prepping our offices. That's not an accident. It's a system. We didn't just get distracted. We got played, the crowd murmured. The weight of that truth landed like a stone. The moderator pressed harder. So what now? What's the fix? Kennedy breathed deeply. We need firewalls between lobbying groups and media strategy firms, between policy and optics, between the performance and the process, AOC added. And we need to be honest with voters about who funds our campaigns, who crafts our messages, who owns our airtime. Then came the hardest question. Do either of you still believe in this system? The pause was long. AOC's eyes narrowed. I believe in what it could be, but not what it is. Kennedy nodded. Same. And I think the only way to fix it is to stop pretending we're not part of the problem. The audience didn't erupt in applause. They just listened hard. The town hall lasted 2 hours. By the end, the moderator said little. He just thanked them, stood, and walked off stage. AOC and Kennedy stood slowly. No handshakes this time. It's just a glance between two people who had been turned into symbols, then headlines. Then Toolsand, who had finally stepped back into something harder. But real, their own voices. That night, clips from the town hall spread, but not in meme format. Not in joke edits. They were shared raw, mostly with captions like, "This felt different. No handlers, no spin. Maybe there's still hope." Layla watched it unfold from her apartment, then uploaded her final piece. The headline read, "When politicians show up as people. A town hall with no scripts, no noise." And then, beneath that, she added a line she hadn't planned. Sometimes clarity doesn't trend, but it sticks. She hit publish. And for the first time in months, the story wasn't about the fight, it was about what came after. The days following the town hall felt strange, not quiet but clearer. For once, the media didn't flood the air with spin or sound bites. Instead, anchors spoke in restrained tones. Round tables focused on ideas, and comment sections, usually hostile, were filled with an odd emotion. Respect. Something had shifted. And not just around AOC and Kennedy. Across the country, voters started demanding unscripted moments from their leaders. Town halls, community meetings, even virtual forums saw attendance spike. Politicians who had once relied on carefully rehearsed outrage began to stumble, unsure how to speak plainly. And those who could, they rose. AOC and Kennedy didn't speak to each other after the event, but their names stayed side by side in headlines. Not as enemies nor allies, but as case studies of what happens when people stop performing and start listening. Meanwhile, Layla Vargas was summoned to appear before a closed-door ethics subcommittee, not as a suspect, but as a resource. Her reports had triggered a federal audit of 6 consulting firms. One had already shut down, another had scrubbed its website, and within weeks, the Senate had drafted a bipartisan bill aimed at curbing third-party media influence in congressional messaging. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a beginning. Inside one committee room, Layla was asked a question by an older senator, Ms. Vargas. Do you believe the American people are capable of handling the truth, filtered, unpolished? She replied simply, I think they've been handling lies just fine. Truth might be a relief. The bill moved forward. At the same time, Kennedy launched an independent public archive, a digital repository of all congressional hearings, unedited, without network filters. The site crashed in the first 12 hours from traffic. He issued a quiet press release. We're not selling a message. We're offering raw facts. Come see for yourself. AOC went another way. She partnered with young tech developers to create a live feedback system for town halls, a way for attendees to track in real time what was being answered, dodged, or manipulated. The beta version launched in her district and was adopted by 3 other cities within weeks, opposite ends of the spectrum, but strangely aligned. Neither of them acknowledged the growing rumors that a coalition was forming, a new caucus. Not tied to left or right, but to transparency. Behind the scenes, Kennedy's old political allies urged him to consider a run again. This time not for Congress, but as an independent candidate for a broader national platform. AOC, meanwhile, was asked to headline a university tour on political ethics. She declined. "I want to earn quiet before I take the mic again." She told a friend, the media, now desperate for a new narrative, tried to provoke another headline moment, but nothing came. No viral feud, no insult, no staged walkouts. Instead, journalists like Layla found themselves covering policy, again actual policy, vaccine distribution oversight, funding accountability, lobbyist registration, one network once known for partisan brawls. Aired a 90-minute special titled The Cost of Performance Politics. At the end, the host, known for shouting, simply said, "Maybe we were the punchline all along." Philadelphia, a quiet ceremony was held in the same theater where the town hall had taken place. A small plaque was installed backstage. It read, "Here, two voices stopped performing and started being heard." No cameras covered it. But Layla was there. She stood silently, notebook in hand, watching a janitor polish the plaque's brass edge. She didn't speak. She just wrote a single sentence in her journal. "This is what democracy feels like when it breathes." Later that evening, AOC posted a photo not of herself, not of a quote, but of a community meeting in a gymnasium. The caption read, "Less spotlight, more flashlight. Let's find what's been hiding." Kennedy, on the same day, published a short essay, not in a paper, not on a political blog, just quietly posted on his site. It ended with this: "Legacy isn't what they write about you after you're gone. It's what people can still do after the noise stops." I hope the noise stops more often. Across a country that had been drowning in scripted drama, the quiet began to spread. Not as silence, but as signal. The hearing room felt different this time. No longer a space for hidden jabs and subtle theater. It had become a battleground lit by 1,000 lenses. The Special Committee on Media Ethics and Foreign Influence was about to begin, and both AOC and RFK Jr. had been called back not as rivals, but as witnesses to something larger than either had anticipated. Outside, hundreds of protesters had gathered. Some were quiet, holding up signs that said, "Truth has no script." Others chanted against corporate influence, against the commodification of politics, and against the companies that had turned democracy into content. Inside, the room was cold and formal. The committee chair, Senator Horowitz, cleared his throat. As the cameras rolled live across all major networks, first to speak was Layla Vargas. The young journalist's presence wasn't expected. She had been subpoenaed after her second expose revealed that Narrate Strategies, the firm behind the crafted talking points, had not only been hired by political offices, but also by news networks. The public wasn't just watching prepped politicians. They were watching interviews, debates, even fact-checking. Segments all subtly shaped by coordinated messaging. Layla kept her voice calm. Her documents were in order. She laid out the contracts, the coaching logs, the funding trails. She named clients, including 2 mainstream networks and a congressional media liaison. Then came Eddie. He didn't wear a suit. He looked tired, maybe even older than the last hearing. But his voice was steady. "I never asked for scripting," he said. "But I didn't ask enough questions either. I accepted the help, thinking it was just preparation. It wasn't. It was performance. And I let it happen." A silence followed. Not a shocked silence, a respectful one. It was the first time Kennedy admitted he'd been handled. And the weight of that admission changed the air. Then AOC took her seat. Unlike before, her tone wasn't fire. It was low, even thoughtful. "Politics has always had messaging," she began. "But there's a difference between message discipline and message engineering. I didn't know how far it went. I should have. I was reckless." She paused before continuing. When I called Mr. Kennedy a punchline, I believed I was being bold. But now I wonder, was I just echoing a line someone knew would explode? Nobody interrupted her, not even her opponents. She leaned closer to the mic and added, "I don't regret calling out dangerous speech. But I do regret becoming one more character in someone else's narrative." The testimony sparked immediate headlines. Kennedy and AOC admit to media manipulation, a reckoning in Congress when performance becomes policy. But behind the scenes, something else stirred. A classified report was delivered that same day to Senate leadership. It came from the Office of Cyber Influence Monitoring. The report included emails between lobbyists and Narrate. Strategies suggesting that the media firestorm had been more than just manipulation, had been a deliberate effort to bury foreign aid scrutiny. It's tied to pharmaceutical contracts in emerging nations. The names involved were powerful. Too powerful to be leaked. Not yet. Meanwhile, Kennedy and AOC left the building from opposite exits. Reporters chased them, but neither spoke. What they didn't know was that they would see each other again sooner than expected. This time, not in Congress, but on a stage that neither controlled. The next day, well-known nonpartisan civic group invited both of them to speak at a national town hall event in Philadelphia. The topic: When Civics Meets Performance, Saving Truth in an Age of Optics. Neither could say no. The invitation wasn't optional anymore. The public expected them there. Their legacies demanded it. Layla watched the headlines from her desk. The story wasn't just breaking, it was reshaping. Her inbox was full of threats and praise. She'd been offered jobs and lawsuits. But she didn't stop. She kept digging. She found a whistleblower and intern who had worked at Narrate Strategies for 6 months before the scandal. He had logs, recordings, training videos showing how clients were taught to speak in sound bites, provoke rivals, and pivot when challenged. One clip even featured a training scenario almost identical to the AOC Kennedy exchange months. Before the actual hearing, Layla saved the files to a secure drive. She didn't publish them. Not yet. She wanted to see what Kennedy and AOC would do next, not behind desks, but face-to-face with no handlers, no scripts, number consultants whispering just off camera. The town hall was 1 week away, and for the first time in years, millions weren't tuning in to see who would win. They were tuning in to see who would show up as themselves. The final chapter didn't arrive with a headline. It arrived in the form of stillness after months of fire, noise, accusation, and exposure. A strange peace settled over the national stage. Not because all questions were answered, but because, for once, they were being asked honestly. The Ethics in Political Media Act passed the Senate by a narrow but historic margin. It required full disclosure of third-party media consultants, banned foreign-funded firms from domestic campaign messaging, and created an independent watchdog panel to review televised congressional hearings. For the first time, performance politics had a price tag attached and the public could read the receipt. Layla Vargas stood outside the Capitol that day, watching the press scramble to summarize what she already knew couldn't be captured. In sound bites, she didn't try to go viral this time. Instead, she quietly filed her final story for the season. This wasn't a scandal. It was a mirror. And what we saw wasn't corruption, it was habit. But habits can break, especially when enough people stop clapping. Her words were printed in papers, quoted on broadcasts, and read aloud at universities. She was offered a book deal. She said no, she wasn't done reporting yet. AOC, after months of restraint, agreed to a final sit-down interview. But not with a legacy outlet. Not with CNN or MSNBC. She chose a student-led political podcast out of Baltimore. She showed up alone. No press team, no filters. They asked her one question. If you could redo it, all the hearing, the insults, the silence, would you? She thought about it. Then she said, no, because what I regret isn't the moment. It's the system that made the moment feel necessary. I wanted impact and I got it. But at what cost? Truth should never be reduced to a moment. The clip went viral anyway. Kennedy, meanwhile, refused any interviews. But he kept writing, one essay a week. Short, dense, sometimes rambling, always personal. One stood out. People ask why I stayed so calm. The truth? I wasn't calm. I was tired. Tired of the noise, having to win the moment just to lose the meaning. That hearing wasn't my victory. It was my alarm clock. And it kept ringing. At universities, debate programs started shifting. Less focus on zingers, more on long-form argument. In media schools, new classes emerged: ethics in virality, democracy in optics, soundbite versus substance. In Congress, a quiet shakeup began. Fresh candidates, independent, unpolished, low budgets, started gaining traction. Their campaigns were clumsy, their speeches awkward, but they felt real. Voters noticed. At a high school in Des Moines, a social studies teacher streamed the full, unedited town hall of AOC and Kennedy for her students. One senior raised her hand at the end and asked, "So, is this what hope looks like now?" No one had a perfect answer, but the question lingered in the air like fresh oxygen. Months later, the special committee released its final report. It confirmed what many had feared. A network of foreign and domestic media consultancies had influenced not just messaging, but policy narrative shaping in both chambers. No direct criminal charges followed yet, but the fallout reached far. Resignations, investigations, funding pulled. The system didn't fall, it shifted. And in that shift, something opened. AOC walked into her next re-election campaign differently. No slogan, no ads, just weekly town halls, handwritten flyers, and policy explainers on a chalkboard. Kennedy declined a presidential run. Instead, he focused on building a platform for civic education, partnering with bipartisan nonprofits to teach political literacy. In public schools, Layla, now a household name, refused to accept speaking fees. She began training young journalists in how to spot manipulation, not just in others, but in themselves. The Town Hall Theater in Philadelphia was renamed then Vargas Civic Stage. No one cheered the day the plaque was unveiled. They just stood. AOC showed up, so did Kennedy. No cameras. Just respect. As they passed each other at the door, he nodded. "Still think I'm a punchline?" he asked with a small smile. She shook her head. "No," she replied. "Just someone who knew how to pause when I didn't." He chuckled once, then walked on. And with that, they left. Not as rivals, not as icons. Just as people who had once shouted over each other. And finally learned to listen. Asked ChatGPT.